Hello, my name is Dr. Amy Geneva, and I myself am on camera with supplementary B-roll being submitted additionally by camera personnel, Dr. Junaid Khan. Today's date is Tuesday, June 9th, 2020, and I'm interviewing Dr. Hameed Khan for the first time. The interview has taken place remotely through Skype interviewing technology, both in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, as well as the Bay Area, San Francisco, California. The interview is being conducted on behalf of the 1947 Partition Archive. Dr. Hameed Khan, could you please state your full legal name for the camera?
My first name is Hameed, Hameed. I use a middle initial A, which is for Abdul. Last name Khan.
And is this your name at birth or has it changed since?
No, the name has never been changed.
Are you known by any nicknames?
Say it again.
Are you known by any nicknames?
No, they just call me Hameed, that's it. Okay. But since I was the younger of the two brothers, they call me younger brother, in Urdu called Chote Bhai. So the sisters call me Chote Bhai, meaning younger brother.
And what is your father's name?
His name was, main name was Wahab, but they used initial Abdul before, so Abdul Wahab. Last name was same, Khan, but he was a poet and used a poetic name called Asim, Asim.
And what was your mother's name?
That was same as my first name, Hameed with a to make it feminine, Hamida, Hamida, Hamida.
And where were you born?
That was a city in Rajasthan called Jaipur, nicknamed Pink City of Asia, and that's called Jaipur. That's where I was born.
And what is your birth date?
February 12, 1935, same as Lincoln's birthday, February 12.
And how far back can you trace your father's lineage on his side?
I missed that part.
How far back can you trace your father's family on his side? So grandparents, great-grandparents?
Yeah, we were able to trace up to the fourth generation from my father's time. But historically, it is said that when Alexander the Great moved from Macedonia, coming all the way through the South Europe, through Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, Afghanistan, up to the northern Pakistan, when he quitted, and he quit further journey, and he released all his journals free to go back to Europe or stay there. Some of the journals decided to stay in northern India, that was India at that time. They got married with Afghan and North Indian ladies, and that was a new generation started from there. And it is said that we came from those mixed generation of Macedonia soldiers and North Indian people, which is Pakistan now.
And has your father ever told you any stories, bedtime stories regarding your family history?
Yeah, and I was able to trace up to the fourth generation of my great-great-parents.
And are there any particular stories that your father told you about your great-grandparents and the four generations that stands out to you today?
That was what my father told me about those generations. And he heard that from the other people, how we originally came from Macedonia all the way to northern India. So that was a mixed culture. Historically, northern India is called Punjab. Punjab means 5 rivers. That was a very cultivated area, beautiful gardens. And when the Mughal emperor occupied the whole India, one of the Mughal emperor married the princess of Jaipur, and he wanted to make Jaipur as a beautiful garden. So he sent his people to the northern India to get some people who knew about the gardening, and they are the one who came to the Jaipur to make it the pink city of Asia, Jaipur. That's how we ended up in Jaipur.
And do you know the origins of your last name, Khan? Is there a story behind your last name?
No, but because our ancestors were in the good books of the Mughal Empire, so they give the title Khan means the kind of a ruler. That's how the name Khan was given to our ancestors.
And going to your mother's side, how far back can you trace her family history?
3 generations. Next to the city of Jaipur, there is a hilly resort called Amer, Aamir, Amer. My mother's parents were born and raised in the village or the hill of Amer, and my mother was born in Amer till she got married, and that's only about 10 miles away from Jaipur, that hill station. And then my mother moved from Amer to Jaipur and stays there for rest of the life.
And had your mother told you any stories about her family when you were growing up, some bedtime stories or things about her parents that you remember?
Yeah, that's what narrated by my mother. She was told by her father how they ended up in Jaipur, and then they were all the time in the hill station of Amer till they moved back to Jaipur.
And thinking more about your parents, did they ever tell you about their life growing up? What were some of their activities that they like to do as children themselves?
My mother's grandparents were gardeners in that area. So their main hobby was doing the royal gardens in that area. They did some other trades also, but mainly the gardening. So my mother's father was a gardener in that area till the end.
Okay. And so going to your life before 1947, how many individuals lived within your household?
We used to come from the family when there's a big family orientation. And my grandfather were 3 brothers. My grandfather was youngest of the 3, and my father was very close to him. So he stayed with the youngest person, my grandfather. And he had 7 children. So they all lived together. We had a big ranch house of my grandfather. So all the 7 siblings and myself were raised on that ranch place.
And can you discuss your siblings? What were their names and if they were gendered male or female?
Yeah, we were all raised on that ranch farm or with my siblings. With the one thing I might mention, I had 3 elder sisters, and my grandfather wanted to have a boy. And once the gynecologist told my father that my mother is expecting a boy at this time, he was very excited. And that was a Dutch gynecologist, a good friend of the family of the mission hospital in Jaipur. And my father asked her, I want my grandson to be born in my ranch place. And the gynecologist said, we need an operating room and a lot of equipment. So my grandfather said, there is a room there in the ranch, will be designated as your room, as your mini operating theater. Get all the needed equipment, and after my grandson is born, I will donate that all to the mission hospital. So that's where she made it, and I was born in that special room in the ranch house, in my own house. That's where I was born, not in the hospital.
Thank you. So you said that you have 3 older sisters, and then you are the 4th child. How many siblings were after you?
4 more after that.
Okay.
I had 1 older brother, then 3 sisters, then me, and then 4 younger sisters.
Thank you. And thinking about your household in Jaipur, what were the roles of everybody within the house? So the role of your father and his job, as well as your mother's.
My grandmother ran the whole family and other, and my father, before he became the state treasurer, used to work for another estate called Manavadar, and he was the financial advisor to the ruler of Manavadar. So much of the time he stayed in Manavadar. He stayed there for almost like 10 years, going back and forth from Jaipur to Manavadar. And my grandmother was running the entire show at that time, till my father finally moved back to Jaipur.
And what was your mother's role within the household?
Even though my grandmother was running the whole show, and my mother was her youngest daughter-in-law, so one day she was very happy. She used to keep the key in a belt. She took one day the key and gave to my mother. These are your for the everything, and you are in charge from now on. And after that, my mother took over the whole show.
Describe your daily life growing up as a child in Jaipur.
Since there were 7 sisters, of course, and I was the middle of the child, conventionally boys were taken more precious than the girls in that culture at that point in time. So I was the most favorite for my grandparents. And she favored me, of course, very much.
And what things did you do for fun as a child in Jaipur?
Because my grandparents had a lot of ancestral gardens, fruit gardens, agriculture land and other, and my father in the backyard has created his own private garden. So much of the time I used to spend the time over there. There was one area in the backyard, my grandfather made it what is called the rose garden, only roses in that area. And my elder brother was 10 years older to me. He used to ask my mother, I want to take my baby brother to the rose garden. Wrap in a blanket, used to take to the rose garden and sit there for hours and hours. And my mother said, why you have to go to that place? He said, I want my baby brother to keep smelling the roses so his mind will be as bright and rosy. I don't know how much it worked, but that's the way he did it.
And so you said that there was a rose garden. Can you describe how else the house looked, the house itself that you grew up on, and some of the outside areas?
Since I was interested because of my grandfather into the gardening, as a young boy till my middle high school level, I was doing a lot of gardening in the backyard and I enjoyed that very much. And I had a small area called my garden where I used to grow things there and took care of them myself till the high school time.
And what did you grow yourself in my garden that you had?
Mainly the flowers, but I did grow some vegetables also in that area, but multiple things, a variety of things.
And was the garden attached to the house, or did you have to walk some distance in order to get there?
Yeah, because there was a big swimming pool in our backyard. So my grandmother was always worried that the baby might go close to the swimming pool till I learn how to swim. So she has designated one of our gardening servants to shadow me all the time when I was working in the garden to make sure I don't go close to the swimming pool. So I was chaperoned by that person. His name was Jyotia. I still remember that person. He was very good to me.
And can you describe the house that you grew up on?
I missed the last part.
If you can describe the house that you grew up in, was it 2 stories? Was it large, 5 bedrooms? Whatever details you can remember about your house.
Yeah, it was a 3-level huge house. We were onto the main level, and there was one level 6 feet down where my sister's rooms used to be there. Upper level was for my grandparents. I enjoyed that area very much. That's where my grandfather spent the time. And that's where he used to, from that deck, used to take his horse. And he went to his gardens to inspect on the horseback. So that's the memory I have of that middle level. My grandfather getting on the horseback and going around.
And was that the main mode of transportation, horseback, in Jaipur when you were a child?
My grandfather, I was only 3 years old when I lost my grandfather. But at that age, once in a while, my grandfather used to take me in front of him on the horseback. So I used to go to his garden, other riding on the horseback. One day when my grandpa came back after the rounds and the horse was still there, I used to take care of that horse because my grandmother used to give me a lot of apples and carrots. I shared that with my horse, so he loved me. And one day when I gave him the apple, he turned around to say, like saying, thank you, come on. And without thinking, I got back onto the horseback and he just jumped. And when the horse was going there, there was a cow shed with a tin roof. And as the horse was going, uh, at my level, the tin shed hit my head at this level to make a deep cut. I was naturally passed out, fell down when my mother came to help me. And I was semi-unconscious for 3 days after that head injury. My mother has read someplace that silk ash is good antiseptic. She was wearing her silk nightgown, so she put that silk gown immediately on the flame, make an ash, and fill that wound with that silk ash. And then she always used to say, my silk gown is here, you get me replacement. So that's the scar that you see, fell from the horse.
Wow. And thinking about your childhood as well, did you have friends that lived nearby to you? If you can describe some of the friendships that you had as a child.
As a child, I used to play much of the time with my sisters, but I wanted to play more with the boys rather than the sisters. And then my mother arranged a couple of male cousins living in the neighborhood to offer them their breakfast and lunch and other attractions to come and play with me. So there were a couple of my cousins of my age, rather older than me, used to come to our house. And then with them, I used to go to our own garden with lot of fruit trees, mainly the mango trees. And just to keep my female cousins happy, I used to climb those trees, pluck the mangoes from there and throw to the girls down there. That's how I became their favorite. I was giving them mangoes.
So you said that you were playing with your cousins as a child. Did they live nearby in Jaipur, near to you? What was that like, that family structure?
Correct. But mainly I played with my male cousins, of course, but mainly there were 6 baby sisters. So I spent a lot of time with my sister and their female cousin friends also. So we used to go to the garden, run around each other and enjoyed the life till I grew up post high school.
And did everybody live near to you, or did you have to travel distances in order to play?
No, they all, much of the time in our ranch house. Our other cousins' houses were little smaller, but were in the neighborhood. So majority of them used to come and spend their time in my ranch house. So they were there all the time. I rarely visited their house. They all the time visited our house.
Could you describe your neighborhood a bit? How did people in the neighborhood area shop for food? Was it they had their own farms? If you could just describe what it was like living in that neighborhood.
If I understand correctly, much of the time with my cousins and others, I spent much of the time on my ranch and my private garden there till I grew up.
Okay. So you didn't venture out much then, is that correct?
That is correct. And my father has 2 elder brothers who very much wanted me to be with them. So once in a while, mainly my oldest uncle, who has a huge house, used to come and pick me alone, and I spent a couple of nights in their house also. But I really went to.
And can you describe? Thank you. Could you describe some of the rituals and religious celebrations that were when you were a child?
That's all I remember of my childhood, spending
Mhm.
some time with my uncle's house and cousins, but mainly with my grandparents in my own house.
Were there any religious celebrations from your childhood that you remember, or no?
About the vacations, since my father was a state treasurer, he used to travel a lot by train to different areas around Jaipur. Once in a while, he used to take me in the train. So I have a good recollection from Jaipur going to Ajmer is a big popular city, Delhi, and one popular city where the Taj Mahal is there called Agra. So I have the visit going to those three major cities with my father by train.
Okay. And when you were younger, thinking about some of your activities, so you said that you loved gardening, and then also you would climb up the mango trees when you were playing with cousins. So my question for you is this: did you play any instruments as a child, or were there certain activities that you liked to do by yourself?
That was my main hobby was gardening. But when I was in the junior high school, I wanted my mother to spend more time with me rather than with my sisters. But much of the time she was stitching clothes. So I noticed my mother was spending a lot of time doing tailoring at home. In the junior high school, I was asked to take an optional subject, pottery, gardening, clothing, tailoring, other. I decided to get tailoring for those 3 months so I could learn to tailor with the idea back of the mind I can help my mother in the tailoring. And the first thing I remember, I made a sleeping suit for my father, which he enjoyed very much. And he kept it as a treasure. So that was one of the other hobby I used in junior high school, tailoring.
Okay. If you could talk about your schooling a little bit more, can you describe your education growing up before 1947?
Yeah, there was close to our range, there was a junior high school. That's where I did up to my junior high school. Once I graduated there, there was a popular high school in the city of Jaipur named after the ruler of the state, Maharaja. And I went to Maharaja High School, and that's where I did my high school graduation at Maharaja's High School. After Maharaja's High School, there was a college also named after that Maharaja College. I did my first year of college at that place. When finally my father, who had decided after the partition of 1947 not to move out of the Jaipur as majority of the people were moving to Pakistan because we had large agriculture land, our lot of properties and gardens, and my father wanted to stay in Jaipur. But a time came when our property and life were under threat. And my father had a lot of Hindu friends in the area. They told my father that your life is at a risk. Your house might be attacked any time because you have a big landlord. You have a prestigious position as a state treasurer, so treasury keys are with you. And that time, India coined a new term, intending evacuee. So my father was labeled as intending evacuee. That's the time my father finally decided to move from India to Pakistan. And that was in 1950 when my father was desperate. We moved to in 19 after 47. We were still there for 3 years, but in 1950 we moved to Pakistan, and that's where I did my first year college in Jaipur and then second year in Pakistan.
I would like to ask you more questions later about moving to Pakistan in 1950, but I would just like to rewind and go back before partition in 1947. How old were you when partition happened?
It was very hectic to move out from a huge ranch, big house that my father has built for ourselves and in a very prestigious area. But when I and my mother moved to Pakistan, initially we moved to my big brother, who was already there working as a engineer in that area, had a 4-bedroom apartment. So from the big house, we had to move to that 4-bedroom apartment for a couple of years. And it was very hectic, very uncomfortable to live in that small apartment. Till after some time, which is, I believe, 2, 3 years, my father was able to purchase a house in Pakistan for ourselves. Then we moved there. But those 2, 3 years living in the apartment was very hectic and was rough, and I still have the memory.
So I'll ask you about those a little bit later, but in 1947, you were 12 years old, is that correct? During partition?
I was still in Jaipur at the time of partition. The ruler of the state, His Highness the Maharaja of the Jaipur, was very friendly to the Muslim population that we were there. It was predominantly a Hindu state though, but we were. And the chief minister of Jaipur at that time was also a Muslim. So even though there were a lot of riots going all over the India between Hindus and Muslims, Jaipur was one of the states which was very well protected by the government against those things. And it remained like there for 2, 3 years after the 47 partition, but then it started getting worse and worse. And I think it was 1949, a lot of riots started coming in the Jaipur state also, when we knew that we were at a threat for our life and property. So then we had no choice but to move out from there. So I still have the recollection from 47 to 1949 of a rough time, scared all the time from attacks against the rebels. It was scary, but we managed it.
And before partition in 1947, when you're in junior high school, what was the demographics? So was it mostly, did you have like people that were Muslim, Hindus, Sikhs? What was that demographic like before 1947? And did you notice changes after?
It changed drastically, even though we live in a predominantly Hindu neighborhood. But because of my father's position and other things, a couple of the surrounding houses were Muslim houses also. So we kind of protected each other from potential risks. But when those Muslim neighborhoods started moving out, we were kind of left alone in the predominantly Hindu area. That's when we moved it. So that was a hectic, scary time, but we managed for 2, 3 years in that area.
And so,
Hindu friends were very friendly to us, and they were protecting us.
and so you were a child at this time, but do you remember when partition happened, what your initial thoughts were? Did you understand what partition was as a child at that time?
When I was in high school, that's when the partition happened. I didn't give much to it because we didn't feel much burden as rest of the India was feeling it, because we were in a very secure area, well protected by the ruler of the state. And incidentally, there was an area called the resident of that state house was there, and other side was the Maharaja's palace, and our house came in between the resident's house and the Maharaja's palace. So that was considered to be a very protected area that time. So we didn't have much fear of any damages. Majority of my father's Hindu friends were very protective on us, and they were protecting us. They even did night patrolling our house in that rough area.
And did anything change for you immediately? So you said that it was a well-protected area, but were there changes that you noticed right after partition in Jaipur?
No, it did not affect much because I was a protected child. But I lost my grandfather by that time. But my father had designated an special person who was previously a gardener to be my shadow, to keep watching me wherever I go, and that I am well protected. And then my father hired a kind of a nanny for me when I was 4 or 5 years old. Her name was Mary. She was a wonderful Christian missionary, and she was my nanny till I went up to the junior high school. So I was protected by those two people while growing into that troubled area. So I didn't feel much burden or I didn't feel scared till I went to the high school.
Okay. And so let's talk about that in high school. So you said that that's when you started to have fears. What caused those fears when you were going into high school?
Because we used to hear a lot of news from our neighboring area, which was Bharatpur and other states. There were a lot of attacks on the Muslim property by the Hindu extremists. So we used to hear it. So we were worried it can happen in Jaipur also. But till we were there, it did not happen in the Jaipur state. We were very well protected, but neighboring states were under big turmoil. So that was a scare we used to have it, that we might be attacked at any time.
And was this happening within your schools? Were you discussing this within high school, within your classes, or was this something that was discussed at home only?
Initially, my high school from my home was only about 5-6 miles. So I used to walk there. But then my father decided, because they knew who I was walking on the street, that I could be kidnapped or attacked or something. So my father used a horse-driven cart. It was called Victoria. It was a big car driven by the horse. And my father decided that I will go to the high school in that horse-driven cart only. And when the time of the school was ending, the cart used to go back there to pick me. So I was going back and forth in that Victoria only. So I was pretty safe in that area rather than walking on the street.
Okay. And did you notice any changes within your friends during that time? So you said that you were well protected, but did you know anybody that had to move during partition from Jaipur, or was any of your extended family affected?
My father's immediate assistant, which was assistant state treasurer, I happen to remember his name, Mr. Mathur. He was a Hindu. He knew about the threat the Muslims were having. So he was very, very protective on me. And he often used to come to my high school, talk to the teachers and others. The state treasury office was just across the street from my high school. So he used to walk down to my high school to make sure, talk to the teachers, that I was safe from any other Hindu extremists. So I feel very safe and secure by Mr. Mathur's presence around me.
Okay. So just kind of taking a turn, on January 30th in 1948, it was Gandhi's assassination, and you were in Jaipur at the time. Do you remember when you heard about that assassination, and did it impact your family in any way?
I used to hear all those disturbing news though, but did not affect my immediate neighborhood till I moved out.
Okay.
My brother, who was an engineer in India, and during the partition, he opted to get a reciprocal place in Pakistan, engineer to engineer, and he was there. And he had already moved there. And in Pakistan, the college start in July. And my father decided to move sometime in late August or early September. But he decided to send me alone by air to Pakistan to join the college, so I don't miss a couple of months of the high school. So I was the only one which went to Pakistan alone in June, and my mother and sisters joined me sometime in September, leaving my father alone. My father had a huge library of his own, a personal library of few hundred books, which was very precious to him. And he left everything in India, the property, money, and everything, but he wanted to take his books with him. So Mr. Mathur, his assistant, volunteered that you are taking the lot of boxes of the books. It will be in people's eye that a Muslim is moving with lot of baggage. So he booked all those bookcases under his name from Jaipur to the port city of Bombay. And he told my father, once he is in Bombay with the books, he will let me know. Then my father would go alone. And then my father boarded on that same ship in which all my father's books were there. And that's the only thing he took from India to Pakistan, few hundred of his precious books by ship. So I went alone to Pakistan. My mother and sister moved after a couple of months by a chartered aeroplane, and only my father came by ship from Bombay to Pakistan. And then we settled there in my brother's apartment till we got our own house.
So let's talk about when you were in Pakistan by yourself before your mother and sisters came. Were you with your brother at that time when you went to Pakistan?
Uh, I missed the question, but if I understand, once I moved, I was living in my brother's small apartment, and my father was not working at that time. But then my father was getting bored staying at home. So there was a import-export company by the name Marsh and Company. So my father accepted a position of general manager for Marsh and Company, and he was used to move by the private transport only. But for the first year, it was very hectic for him. But he was taking a bus from our house to the downtown Karachi to go to the place till we were able to purchase a car.
Okay. And how did you yourself get to Karachi in 1950? What was your mode of transportation to get there?
I liked the environment and others, and immediately I went to Karachi. I was immediately accepted in the second year of my college, so I studied second year from there till I went to the medical school. By the time I went to the medical school, my father has already purchased a house for ourselves. And at that time, even though I had learned to drive, my father decided to have a chauffeur-driven car. So that driver used to take me from our house in a city called Nazimabad to my high school, to my college. And after a couple of months, I became so comfortable, and I said, Father, I don't need a chauffeur. And then I was driving my own car at that time.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk about some of the changes for you moving from Jaipur to Pakistan. So when you resettled with your brother there for those few months, what were some changes that you noticed from Jaipur to Karachi?
It did not make any big difference because my life still remained comfortable between the two places, except moving from a big ranch house to a small apartment. But I was busy studying it. However, do remember that since I was preparing for my medical school and I was sharing the room with my sisters, so there was no place for me to study. So just about 2 miles from the apartment, there was a beautiful garden area, a public park called Residency Park. So early in the morning, my mother used to fix my sandwich. I used to take my books. I went to that park, and there, sitting in the park, I prepared for my medical school rather than home. And sometime I stayed there till late in the evening. My mother was worried that it might be dark, and I told him there's a street light in the park, so I sit under the light so I can study till late in the evening. That's how I prepared for my medical school rather than home in the park.
And so I'm sure that you are very preoccupied studying for medical school and for your degree, but did you have friends in Karachi that you made when you moved there?
Uh, Once I became a doctor, I decided to do, in addition to residency, uh, locum teens, working for other physicians, which used to give me significant money, which I give to my mother that I'm earning now. And after 1 year of doing the residency, I started my own private practice in addition to being accepted as a medical officer for a county clinic. So I used to work for the county clinic from 7 morning till 5 in the evening. And then from 5 to 8, I used to run my own private practice, and I was making a lot more money from there than my salary from the corporation. So I became financially very well off within the first 2 years of my medical practice.
So, what made you want to become a doctor?
I have been a practicing doctor for 60 years now, but I practiced in Karachi, Pakistan for 20 years before I moved to the United States in 1973.
Why did you want to become a doctor?
I was doing general practice, which is equivalent to family physician here now. So I was doing family practice.
Oh.
And then we were in Jaipur in an area which is called the immigrant city because majority of the people in that area had moved from India. So that's called the immigrant city. And when President Bhutto was there, he wanted to favor the immigrants. So decided to make a hospital in that immigrant dominated area. And I was designated by the mayor of the city to be in charge of the project to make the hospital. And I was given one engineer and me as a doctor, the team of two of us designed to make a hospital in Naziabad area. That was the time when the India-Pakistan war came and one of the Karachi residents, Abbasi Shaheed, was a pilot, was killed in the fight. That hospital, as a respect, was named after his name, Abbasi Shaheed Memorial Hospital. And when the hospital was built, I was the one who received the President of Pakistan, Mr. Bhutto, to inaugurate that hospital. And I have a good memory of the President coming to inaugurate the hospital, and I was the one who received him. And then I became in charge of that municipal hospital, which was a 150-bedded general hospital. I worked there till 1973 November. And that's the time I decided to move to America. I moved to America in end of 73.
Okay, I would just like to rewind a bit. So, why did you become a doctor? What made you want to do a medical practice? You could have been any other kind of occupation, but why a doctor?
When I was in junior high school, my mother used to get occasional abdominal pain or some kind of a problem. And as I said earlier, the mission hospital in charge, a gynecologist from a Dutch lady, was very friendly with the family. So my father used to call her. So rather than my mother going to the hospital, that gynecologist used to come to our house to check my mother. And when she was checking on my mother and giving, I was in junior high, I used to hang around there. And she said, why are you hanging? He said, I'm learning what you do to my mother. So when I grow up, I will become a doctor and I'll take care of my mother. And my mother smiled and said, you want to become a doctor? I said, mother, yes. And I kept my mother. So I decided in junior high school that I will be a doctor to care for my parents. And I kept it and I became a doctor. And now I had been in practice for 60 years.
And are you the first doctor in your family?
No. In my father's, I was the younger son and I was the first doctor. But my eldest uncle, who has many of his own children, two of them had already become the doctor in that area. But we were unfortunately not very, very close with that uncle. They lived away from us. So they were already the doctors there. But my immediate family, I was the first doctor. And when I graduated, my father decided to figure out how many doctors are there in my grandfather's family. And at that time, my father figured out that when I became a doctor practicing, there were 22 doctors coming from my grandfather. So there were a lot of doctors in my grandfather's family. But I was the first one in my father's family till one of my sisters became a doctor. And finally, my son, who is a heart surgeon now, became a doctor, of course. And he also decided much early in the life that he wanted to be a surgeon. And when he was deciding between a neurosurgeon and heart surgeon, finally he decided to be a heart surgeon.
Well, let's kind of talk about that. I mean, how you got to America, but you were practicing as a doctor in Karachi for 20 years. Did you meet your wife in Karachi when you were a student or when you were already a doctor?
One of my younger sister, who was doing her bachelorate in the University of Karachi, one of her good friends, her class fellow, used to often come to our house to study with her. And she was a 16 or 17-year-old girl. She used to often come to study with my sister. And in plain English, she trapped me that time. I started liking her, and once she was coming, I told my parents that I like her. And my parents liked her very much. So once she was 18, I was 24, we decided to get married. My wife's brother was professor in the university nearby, so my father called him and said, we want to get my son married to your sister. So that's how she was my sister's class fellow. I knew her for more than a year. We loved each other and we got married. Even though there was some cultural difference, my wife came from an Indian city called Punjab. They were just like Texas tom girls, hectic running around. And my father's family came from a culture more like a Massachusetts culture, more sophisticated and other. So my father said there is a cultural difference. And I said, we'll match up. And my wife very quickly adjusted to our kind of culture.
And what is your wife's name?
Naseem. Naseem was the name given to her. Naseem in Urdu means morning breeze. And her parents said that she is like a morning breeze to their family. So they call her Naseem. So that was her real name. But in family, there is a tradition that after marriage, the husband gives the wife a particular personal name to call her. So I give her the name called Seema. Seema means silvery person. So I always call her Seema, but her name was Naseem.
And can you describe your wedding to Nazeem? Where were you married? What city?
My mother's first name?
Oh, no. Nazeem, your wife, you were 24 and she was 18 when you were married. But what city did you get married in?
I just decided to get married. I was already in the second year of my medical practice. And I was ready to get married at that time. And I knew that girl coming to our house anyway. So in the second year of my medical practice, I got married to her. At that time, she has only done first year of the college. So once we got married, she could not continue the education. But then I got my first son. The craze was there that I have to complete my bachelorate. So after my first son was born, she went back to the day university classes and she graduated BSc in political science after becoming a mother.
Okay. I'll ask about your children in a minute, but can you describe your wedding?
The wedding was, I and my wife both decided we have to have a very simple wedding. And since my wife's folk lived in a city, they were originally from Kashmir, the occupied area of the Kashmir. And during the 1947 partition, there was a lot of trouble in the occupied Kashmir area. So my wife's family moved from Kashmir to first a place called Sialkot in northern Pakistan. And from there, they moved to the big city, Lahore. There where my wife lived much of the life till she graduated from the high school. So when the time for marriage came, one of my uncle and my older brother decided to take me by train to the city of Lahore. And it was a small family get-together to get us married there. And then we came back to Karachi as husband and wife. But my mother has a desire to have a big celebration. It is called after wedding, second, third day of the wedding, it's called walima. It's a reception given by the bride's family. So we arrange a big get together by my father and mother arrange to walima there. So I have a recollection there. So wedding was very small and simple. Walima was a huge, and we invited a lot of people in that one. So I have recollection of that.
And so for Valima, was that in Karachi or was that also in Lahore?
If I understand, once we got married, my wife decided to, soon after having the first child, go back to the university to complete her bachelorate. And when we got the second son, she decided to do her PhD in political science. So she started preparing for her doctorate, but she did not complete it when we moved to United States. And then she could not get the reciprocity for all the time she has done for her PhD studies, that she has to start all over again. So we both decided forget about doing the PhD and the doctorate. And at that time, sitting at home, she was getting bored. So she decided to work for a senior citizen home as director of recreation. And she enjoyed that, taking the old folk out to places and other. And she did work as a director of recreation for nursing homes for a while. After a while, since I was very busy in practice, she decided to take over my clinic, to run my clinic as an administrator, and she keep doing it till the end of her life. And that was a big help for my practice.
Okay. I would just like to rewind a bit. Before you even became a doctor. So when you were married, did you live in Karachi right after you married with Nazim? Where did you live together?
When I got married in Karachi, my father already had purchased a house in an area called Nazimabad. We lived there as a married couple. It was a two-story house that my father has purchased. Then I and my mother decided to make on the top of the second floor a unit of one bedroom bathroom unit for us, again for our privacy. So that was the third floor. So after getting married, we were living there on the third floor, which was our bedroom. And we already had our son there. So I and my wife were working. So we left our oldest son Junaid with the grandma. And it's the grandma who raised the children. And when I used to come to my house after the practice, my wife and son were with the mother on the ground floor. So I used to pick my son and take him by stair all the way to the third floor. And the moment I picked him, took him to the top floor, he used to get down and say, "Daddy, I can walk now." I said, "Why did you walk there?" He said, "I love the way you carry me all the way from down up there." And on the top of that roof, third floor, where I made my own private bedroom and other, there was an open area where my wife decided to make a rose garden on the third floor. So there were about 30, 40 rose bushes she used to grow there, and I enjoyed that very much on top of the third floor. And that's where all the way till life I stayed in that house till I decided to move to United States. So I moved suddenly with me and my children together to United States, leaving the house for my mother there.
And so you said that you had two sons, but now you have several children. So if you can describe your children, where they were born and what their names are and when they were born.
All the children were born in that house that I left my mother when I moved down there. And when my mother got her first heart attack a couple of years after I moved to United States, I decided to move her also to United States. And that time my mother sold that house, and my mother and sister moved to live with me in the United States. And since then, I raised my sisters over here. And historically, when my father was very sick and he knew that he may not recover, so one day he called me to the bedside and he said, "Son, I may not be there too long. I have to leave you a big inheritance. I hope you enjoy it." and he looked at my sisters. This is the inheritance I'm leaving for you. And I fulfilled it.
It must have been a difficult time. And where was your father when he passed away?
Yeah. Then my father passed away, and soon my mother passed away too afterwards. So I and my wife raised the six sisters as if they were my children. And even today, my sisters call her mother. That's the way she raised.
You have so much strength and resilience. Truly, it's admirable to raise your sisters, in that time of turmoil. And thinking about your sisters now as part of your strength, are they there in the United States with you, all of them? Or where are they at today?
Yeah, once I brought my six sisters with me from Pakistan to Los Angeles. It was my wife who mainly raised all the sisters, got them married. I was lucky to be able to get them married, purchase houses from them, and move them out. And one day I recall one incident. There was in a group of many people. One of the lady asked me how many children you have. I said three, and my wife immediately yelled, "No, nine." That's the way she raised all the six sisters.
And so what are the age differences, if you tell me? So you had the three children, and what are your three children's names?
Yeah, the house that my father has purchased, I raised my mother and my children in that house till I moved from there. And by the time I came to Los Angeles, I worked for 2 years as an emergency room physician. And by then I was able to purchase a big house in a city called Torrance, which was a big house. There, when I brought my mother and my sister, for 2 years we remained in that house. At that time, my wife decided to purchase a much bigger house in a prestigious area in Los Angeles called Palos Verdes. And there we purchased a small house, and my wife demolished the house and purchased a totally new house at that place, which was a three-level big house where all my children and the sisters were raised till they were married, and slowly they start moving out.
And so you moved in the 1970s from Karachi to the United States. What made you want to move to the United States?
Uh, 2 years after my medical college graduation, I decided to become a heart specialist cardiologist. I told my father, who was very excited. I applied from many places, and I was accepted in University of Edinburgh in England for my postgraduate education as a cardiologist. And I was supposed to move there in June of 1976. That time my father started having some shaking of the hand. I took to the neurologist. He misdiagnosed him. He said it looks like an early arthritis. And my father, being a poet, was also a writer, also used to write novels and books. So writing was his main hobby. And with the shaking hand, he couldn't do that. So that neurologist said, it looks like an early arthritis, but we cannot rule any brain injury. That scared me. And there were no MRI or CAT scan at that time. And that neurologist, I respect him very much. He was my own professor of neurology, but he said it could be a brain tumor or something. So I immediately canceled my moving to England for my postgraduate education that time. My father said, you will be back in 2 years and I will be okay. And I said, Father, I don't have the heart to move out. So I canceled my program to be the heart specialist at that time. And within a couple of years, my practice became very enormous, very profitable, and I keep practicing there for plus 20 years in Karachi. I even lost my father and everything by that time. but that craze in the head to become a specialist was still there. So in 1973, in consultation with my wife, and I already had three children, youngest being 2-year-old, and we said, let's apply to United States. For America, there is a program which is called Education Council for Foreign Medical Graduate, nicknamed ECFMG. To be reciprocal, in America, you have to take that ECFMG. But the United States offered to make some satellite station, including one in Karachi, to take that examination. So I took that examination in Karachi for ECFMG, and I happily passed it. So I had that reciprocity examination comparable to MD in America. And in 73, then I decided to move rather than alone. Me, my wife, and three children, we just moved here. One of my sister was already in Chicago at that time. So I asked her to get an apartment for me, and I moved to Chicago immediately to live in that apartment with my wife and three children. And then soon I was able to purchase a house there also in Chicago. And that's when I joined the residency program. Cardiology program was not available. So I did first year as a psychiatry and other 2 years as a family physician. So I became eligible for an emergency room physician and family physician, but I never took those examinations. By then, my wife's hobby was gardening, my hobby was flying, and Chicago was not a good place for both these hobbies. So we were moving around, and finally, my wife decided to move to Los Angeles, where she can enjoy the gardening and I can enjoy my flying. And I started working as emergency room physician for a couple of years. And then I started my private practice here. So the decision of a junior high school to become a doctor and final years of the medical practice to become a heart specialist both didn't work. And once I came here, I started practicing as a family physician. And I'm happy with what I did it because I'm very stable and doing pretty well. And one day my children asked me, Daddy, if you have a choice now, would you become a doctor again? And I said, without doubt. I love being a doctor. I enjoyed it. I've done for 60 years and I can keep doing it as long. And I had a promise to my wife that at the age 75, I will retire and will start roaming around the world. But I lost her before I turned 75. And having lost her after 50 years of relationship, I felt like if I retired, I'll get sick anyway. So in agreement with my children, I decided I should keep working as long as I can. And my wife is gone for 12 years, but I'm still practicing. And I do plan to continue practice as long as I can. I'm only 85, but I'll keep practicing as long as I can go. So that was the answer, what decision I made after coming to United States.
And what were some of the differences culturally, socially that you noticed, moving from Karachi to Chicago to Los Angeles?
There was a big difference after the partition, moving from India to Pakistan. That was the very hectic type of the life. Rather than a 7-bedroom house to a 3-bedroom apartment and living there for a couple of years till I moved to the house my father purchased. And we lived there for about 12 years in that house till I moved to United States. But once I came to United States, I became so busy in residency program after so many years. I didn't have much of the other social life. My wife did it, but not me. I was just busy for those 3 years doing residency program, and my wife was running all the show. After residency, once we decided to move from Chicago to Los Angeles, my practice became very hectic and very busy. So didn't have much of the other social life, just busy in practice, except 2 weeks a year going on vacation with the children to different parts of the world. And I'm happy I tripped a bunch of countries in the world me and my wife roaming around. Mainly they were like Germany, Europe, France, Greek, England, and many other cities that we used to go on vacation and spend a couple of weeks. But other than that vacation, I didn't had much of the social life. My sisters were married by then, of course, so they used to often invite to their house for get together, New Year's, Eid time and other, but that was the limit of my social life. Actually, the social life was run by my wife only. But I did vacation a couple of weeks. And now I'm ready to get retired. I take the vacation only arranged by my children, mainly the Junaid, that 2-3 weeks a year, he takes me out on vacations to different resorts. And I love enjoying with my grandchildren now.
And so you have Junaid, and what are your other two children's names?
The eldest one, the Junaid, who is the heart surgeon and chairman of Heart Surgeons Association. Younger son, who graduated with the two majors, law and business administration. But finally, instead of completing the law education, he decided to go in business administration. And right now, he's working for Boeing Aircraft Employees Union as director of their IT services. That is OBED, OBID. He is an IT consultant. And my daughter, who graduated as a pre-medical student, but finally one of her students, who rather than going to the medical school went to computer programming, and she had a rational decision that after that college graduation it will take her 7 years before she get an established doctor. Why not go to the computer sciences? He went to University of Chicago for only 2 years. She masters there for computer programming, and then she become very lucky in that and making more money than the early doctors. And right now she's working for a big company called Extra Hop, which makes computer programs for doctors, hospitals, and big insurance companies. And she's the managing director for that company right now, doing the computer program. Her name was Zonera, but my mother nicknamed her Gina. So she is known as Gina. So oldest is Junaid, then is Obed, and the baby, even though she's in upper 40s, she's still a baby. Her name is Gina, computer programmer.
And do you get to see all three of your children often today?
I missed that question.
Do you get to see all three of your children often?
Yeah, all the children were raised in the Los Angeles area, of course. And they went to the prestigious Palos Verdes High School, and then they started moving out. Only Junaid is in Oakland area. Other two are in Seattle. They love Seattle for 10 years. Beautiful city, Seattle. That's where they are. And they give me 3 wonderful grandsons. So I enjoy my 3 grandsons now.
That's wonderful. And so you are still practicing as a doctor at 85 years old. And you said that you've traveled around the world with your family to different countries. And so what are some of the things that you do today? Do you play music? Do you write poetry yourself? How do you occupy your time outside of work?
I'm still busy in my medical practice. When my wife was helping, I used to work for 6.5 Monday to Friday full time and Saturday half time. But later on, I decided, my wife insisted that Saturday is her day. So I stopped practicing on Saturday. So Saturday and Sunday, I was not practicing, and I still don't practicing except going to the hospital rounds. But I'm still full time Monday to Friday. I usually leave home around 9 in the morning. I keep practicing in the clinic up to 6 in the evening. After I go for my hospital round, and then I come home. But even when my wife was with me, she had decided to make a minimum 2 weeks off from the practice. So that's the time we used to go to different places for those 2 weeks. My most favorite place was a city close to the capital city Islamabad called Murray Hills. We enjoyed it. And there was a beautiful resort called Kagan. That was my wife's favorite city, Kagan. So we spent a couple of years, 2 weeks at a time in the valley of Kagan. It is 11,000 feet altitude, beautiful snow-clad mountain, and I enjoyed that. After I lost my best friend of 50 years, I stopped traveling. But then my son decided that we have to take moving, and now uh, 10 days every year, like a long weekend, twice a year, they drag me to different resort places, and they still keep doing it. And I enjoyed those resorts with my grandchildren. So that's the way I still stay pretty busy now.
That's wonderful. And do you have any other hobbies? Are you a musician? You said your father was a poet, but are you a poet? Do you play music yourself?
My father was a poet. I did not pick that bug from that one, except my one of the baby sisters picked on my father's writing, and she became a poetess also. But my main hobby, once we were into Palace Verdes area, my wife maintained her hobby of gardening, and she had a big, huge private gardening. And my hobby from Pakistan was flying. And once I came to Palace Verdes area, I purchased a Skyhawk aeroplane for myself. And I used to enjoy flying in that aeroplane all over the place to visit my children and other. And when I used to fly that aeroplane, my oldest son, Junaid, I used to take him for flying, and he got interested. Daddy, I want to learn to fly, and he took the flying lesson, and I can proudly say he's a better pilot than I am now. And then I got about 10 years back a heart attack. I needed a heart transplant, and that was 15 years back. And my wife was very unhappy with the heart transplant, that it is not safe to fly. So without my consent, she sold my aeroplane. No more flying. So I lost that hobby of flying. Once in a rare while I fly with the friends though, but I don't have an aeroplane. That time my younger son was very much into the water sports. So he made me buy a yacht. So then after I sold the aeroplane, I enjoyed my yacht, going to the ocean, and mainly fishing hobby, and used to catch lots of fishes. The good memory of fishing is a one shark called mako shark, and I used to mainly fish for mako shark. They are about 7, 8 feet long, huge fishes, and they are delicious like swordfish. And then again, I had a mini heart problem, and that's time we decided to sail the boat. So now I neither have the aeroplane nor the yacht. So just move around and enjoy the time with the grandchildren, which I love very much.
And thinking about your time at home, when you're not traveling or with your grandchildren, do you like to garden at your house? Do you have any pets? What is a typical day like for you on a Saturday or Sunday when you're not working?
As my wife has made a big house in Palace Verdes, 3-level house. She developed arthritis of the knee, and 3-level house was too much. So about 3 years before I lost her, she decided to move a single floor house. And as she was looking around, the present house that my son purchased for me had a big backyard. My wife liked it and said, I will build a garden in that backyard. So I'm in this house for about 12 years now, ever since I lost my wife. And because of my wife's hobby of gardening, I decided to make fruit plant. And as it turns out today, there are about 22 fruit trees in my backyard, different kind of fruits, and they give me tons of fruits, and I still enjoy. And even today, I'm maintaining my fruit garden with those 22 fruit trees, And since there's a lot of area in between, I grow my own vegetables. And so much so that all my fruit and vegetable needs are done from my own backyard. That's a fresh fruit and fruit vegetable. And I still enjoy it. That's how I spend my time other than my practicing, keeping my wife's hobby of gardening. And just to go a little backwards, my wife was so good in gardening that in Karachi, Pakistan, there used to be what's called All Pakistan Annual Flower Show. I had purchased a big 1 acre land to build a new home there, which I never built it. So my wife decided to turn that empty land into her garden, where she used to grow a lot of flowers and fruits. And she started competing for All Pakistan Flower Show. And she was so good that for 3 consecutive years, she was declared champion of the All Pakistan Flower Show. And she maintained it. So that was a hobby. And she kept that hobby even when we came to United States. But we did not have a big area in United States, living into first the apartment, then house in Torrance, then house in PV, which did not have a big area. But the present house has a huge backyard that I can grow so many fruit trees and vegetables now.
And do you use any of those fruits and vegetable trees, all 22 of them, for your cooking in your daily life?
As I told you earlier, I was raised with 4 younger girls, and my mother was spending more time with the girls. And much of the time she was cooking and stitching. That's when I decided to take my optional subject of tailoring in junior high school to help my mother's tailoring, which I never had to do it, but I did it. And the other time my mother was very busy cooking for the big family. And we had an extended family. She used to cook a lot. So I offered to my mother that, Mother, I will help you in the cooking. And then the girls were playing with their dolls and others, but much of the time, as a young boy, I spent the time in the kitchen with my mother, and I learned to cook. And many times my father said, whatever Hameed is cooking is really delicious. That was an encouragement. So then I started cooking more and more of cooking with my mother. Once I got married, my wife had made a big decision in the soon after marriage that one Saturday every month we have to go and eat out, no cooking in the house. And her condition was it will be a different restaurant every single time. It was hard for me to find a new restaurant, and I did it every first Saturday of the month. We used to go out to eat. And then I decided that one Saturday a month I will cook for you. So she was the best cook in the family though, but then I started cooking. And then once she went to see her folks from Los Angeles to Pakistan for 2 weeks, and when she was about to come, I decided to cook about 20 different dishes just for her, put on the table the day she came for dinner, and she was amazed how I could cook such wonderful dishes. And then that was an encouragement. And then ever since then, on every birthday for her and our wedding anniversaries, I used to cook for her. So I picked that hobby. And then when I lost my wife, my children said they missed Ammi's cooking very much. So then I decided to start cooking her dishes. All her recipes were in the computer anyway, so I followed it. And my 3 children love those dishes. They're very honest. They say it's the second best. Not the way mother used to cook it, but they're still good. So I have become a good cook now. And all my sisters say I really turned out to be a very good cook. So that was the hobby I picked from my mother when she used to cook, then my wife, and I'm maintaining it, and I plan to keep it.
And what are your favorite dishes to cook?
One of the favorite dish made out of the rice is called pulao. It is a rice cooked in different species with meat mainly we like the beef, but we also cook with mutton and other kind of meat also, and it is called pulao. Second dish is a beef dish. It is called nihari. Nihari is a beef dish. Nihari is a Pakistani word. Nihar means morning. Nihari means something that you eat first thing in the morning. That's why that dish was called from Nihar, Nihari. It's called Nihari. It is made by the beef curry. It is cooked overnight. So we put on the slow burner late in the night. So early in the morning when it is Nihar, Nihar is ready. So we enjoy the Nihari very much. Nobody follow that tradition as the first dish of the morning. Now we eat Nihari all the day, all around. But that is the second dish which I like and my children like the most after pulao is the Nihari. And then I make another mutton dish. It is called korme, which is also a beef dish. And then my daughter is very much into French cooking. So much so that she went for 1 month to Paris to learn French cooking. And she turned an excellent cook. And she taught me some of those French dishes. So I even now cook those French dishes. So I cook the European dishes once in a while, but mainly they are the Pakistani, which we call the Mughal dishes, come from the Mughal emperor. So that's my second hobby beside gardening, cooking.
Dr. Hameed Khan, do you need to take a break at all before I start the last set of questions, or are you good to continue?
I'm very young. I turned 20 only 4 times 5 years ago.
All right, then let's continue on. So,
55 is considered young and I don't need the break. My son did give me to wet the throat anyway.
You don't look a day over 20. So thinking about partition, going back for some of the final sets of questions, how did you feel about partition when it occurred in 1947? What were your thoughts as a child during that time?
Repeat the question.
No, you're fine. So for your final sets of questions, I'm going to be asking about partition, taking it back full circle, and then some questions about today. But in 1947, you were a child. What were your thoughts then about partition?
Same, because in the high school, I knew I will be a doctor in the future, so I can take care of my parents in the future life, which I'm happy and proud I took it. And when after the hectic time of 1947 from college time to Los Angeles, which was very, very hectic couple of years, it was very hard to get used to live into the 7-bedroom house to the 3-bedroom apartment till we got our house. Until I moved to Los Angeles was hectic. But since I was in the residency, I was very, very busy. Since I started my own practice, early part I was working first as an emergency room physician in the morning and later on working my private practice, dividing the time. And when working in the emergency room, it used to be 12-hour shift. Usually 7 morning to 7 evening or 7 evening till the 7 morning. And my wife, at least that's what she said, she was missing me too much. And she made me quit the emergency room at that time. And that was 1982. I quit emergency room practice. Till 82, in addition to doing my private practice, I used to deliver my own patients' children. And I had 100 of childbirth that I conducted it. And in 1983, as I recall, my wife said, why don't you quit your gynae practice? That takes a lot of your time and you have to go middle of the night and other. So after 83, I quit my OB-GYN practice. I quit my emergency room practice. And since then, I got busy in my private practice and admit my own patients anyway. And luckily, from that time, I'm very busy. When I decided to move in 1976 from Chicago to Los Angeles, I was told by many friends, you are moving to an area which is very hard to get established into a private practice. You are making a big mistake moving to Los Angeles. And I said, all life I have taken challenges, I'll take it. So I moved it. And within first year, running emergency room and practice, I became so busy that now I am extremely busy. In 1985, my wife decided that since I was so busy, she hired a physician's assistant, which is like a mini physician, to help me at that time. I even now use a nurse practitioner, which helps me a lot. But much of the time, I see the patient myself. But half days, 2 weeks, I use that extra help, which helps me to relax more, do my more gardening, more reading, more cooking, and more going out to see the children. But I still enjoy my full-time medical practice. No regrets, I enjoy it. And as told my children, if I have to decide again, I'll make the same decision to be a doctor, which I decided in junior high school till now. And I really enjoy it.
And can you describe some of your friends today? Are most of them partition witnesses? Who are your friends in the community today?
I enjoy it. All my patients love and they're it. I even have some of my patients which have been coming to me for the last plus 25 years and other. I enjoyed it. I enjoy my hospital practice. So overall, I love and enjoy the way I'm practicing. The old idea to become a cardiologist in the beginning, I don't have any regret, which I quit because of my father's illness that time. And here, unfortunately, I could not get into that program for the first couple of years. It was very hard to get into that program since they are usually offered to the young graduates. And I was 14 years already from my medical graduation. So I quit that. So, but I honestly speaking have no regrets not to be that super specialist. I enjoy what I'm doing and I'll keep doing it as long as I can do it.
Okay. So thinking about today in 2020 and your memories about partition in 1947, what are your thoughts over 70 years after partition today? So when you think about partition now, what are your thoughts? Are they different from before?
I enjoyed it very much, but I'm an old-time physician.
Oh.
30 years back, doctors used to make the decision. Now the non-doctors make the decision what medication to prescribe and other this HMO kind of a thing. So they tell us you cannot do these tests, you cannot prescribe these medications. So things have changed over the years, but I'm adjusted to that new environment of the medication, which is called HMO, Health Medical Organization Practicing, that they have a fixed formulary that we have to pick the drug out of that list of the medication. We have to pick a doctor for referral out of that list of the specialists. That's what we have to do the practice in which way, how long we keep the patient in the hospital. They decide time to discharge the patient rather than me deciding. And much of the time we agree with that decision anyway. But the things have changed from what we used to practice plus 30 years back to the way we are practicing now, and it became so slowly change over. So, but we are used to it, and we are comfortable with this new pattern of medical practice now.
Okay, so for your final questions that I'm going to be asking, it's about your thoughts today in 2020. So not necessarily related to being a doctor physician, but thinking about Jaipur in the partition times, when you think about partition today in 2020, when August 14th, 15th comes around for the anniversary, do you give it any thought, or is it just another day for you?
Up to high school, I was in Jaipur, of course, and I enjoyed the life there. And we had majority of my friends were from the Hindu culture, couple of Christians, few Muslims also. So it was a multicultural thing, and we were very happy and supporting each other. And I loved and enjoyed that kind of a Jaipur environment. And there were a lot of the friends. When we moved to Pakistan, it was, as I said, very hectic. My father had a very prestigious prestigious position in Jaipur, of course, and the big celebration, which is called Eid, when we used to go for doing the Eid prayers, and when we finished the Eid there was a long, long line of the people to greet my father, to embrace him and shake him, and we could see a huge line waiting to see him. When the first year we moved to Karachi, and I and my elder brother and father, three of them went for the Eid prayer. When the Eid prayer was finished, we were standing. We three of us, each other, and my father looked around. There was no one to greet him. It was not depressing, but my father felt it. Where I am, no one knows me. So he kept standing for 10, 15 minutes, looking around. Maybe somebody will see, and not desperate, but suddenly he told me, "Son, let's go home. Our family is waiting," and came. So that was a big difference between Jaipur and Karachi, that nobody knew my father. There were not so many friends. Slowly we developed friendship. My father, being retired, did not go so much social activity in other. So we have a very small friends who used to come and visit her, or we used to go. But it was a hectic couple of years till we moved to Naziabad. I became a doctor, and then I had a lot of doctor friends. They used to come and visit our house, and we used to have, and then I was already married. So my wife decided to have a big Eid get together at our house. I being the oldest, so everybody used to come on Eid day to our house. So that was a change, like old time Jaipur thing, that we used to have a huge dinner get together on the Eid day. And somehow Junaid is still maintaining it. He gets a good get together on the Eid day. So everyone gathers together.
So, Dr. Khan, I'm just going to ask you a few more questions before we conclude our interview. Is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you would like to say for your interview?
You didn't ask who made the decision. Once I made the final decision to say I do, I did not make any more decisions. She made the decisions. That was the last decision I made, was I do. After that, she made the decision. And
My apologies.
And she made a good decision at that time, that because children had moved out, so daughters, sisters were get married, that once a year we had to go to some resort. And she picked on the hilly station here called a big area over here, that we should rent a house and everybody should go to that place for 1 week. So my wife used to carry at the Big Bear Mountain Resort, and she was doing it every year. After we lost her, Junaid decided to follow the tradition, and once a year, usually at that time, either the Christmas or New Year or something, he picks a time for about a week or so, that we invite all the children and sister and my niece and nephews to that place, and we have a family get together in memory of my wife, and we enjoy it. That way we see each other very much.
Wonderful. So I would just like to ask you a question, because you are doing this interview remotely because of the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Thinking about partition and the pandemic today, have you drawn any parallels? What is it like for you today living during a pandemic in 2020 as a doctor?
Honestly speaking, didn't make a big difference, because even before this epidemic, I used to leave the home, go to the practice 9 in the morning, stayed there till 6, make the hospital round, and then came home and other. With the epidemic, we closed the practice, so I just stay home, but I do teleconference with the patients anyway. So, and then I stay home for, and 2 months I was in kind of self-isolation here, with my children visiting me off and on. And now the offices are opening, so I'm going back to the clinic 4 days a week, and I do teleconference with the patients, but I stay busy. So did not make a big impact on my life except I spend more time at home. And my dog is called Jacqueline. She's happy she never saw me so much before, because once I'm in the house, she comes to the couch and sits with me. And she is with me for 11 years now. And that was a big trick my son played on me. I used to have a German Shepherd before for my daughter, and she died at the age of 16, of course, and I missed it. When I lost my wife, my children were worried that I'll be sitting home getting depressed and other. So without telling me, they got a puppy German Shepherd. The idea was that will keep me busy taking care of her, and I have to compulsorily walk with her every 2-3 miles every day. Otherwise, I would not be walking. If I don't walk, I feel guilty for that dog. So that trick worked out good. So I walk every day a couple of miles with my dog Jackie, and I take care of that. And I enjoy her company.
So your interview will be viewed potentially hundreds of years from now. It's for current as well as future generations. Do you have a message for those who will be listening to your story now and in the future?
I'll tell a mini story. I got a paper from local YMCA that a pupil from Palis Verdes went to northern Pakistan. They want to share their experience. I was interested about my old country. I went to attend that meeting. There were 6 girls and 6 boys who had gone to northern Pakistan. And one girl was very excited, and she went to the northern Pakistan at 15,000 feet elevation, that there are no cars. They used to put their baggage on their donkey or mule and go up there. And they went higher. They say you have to carry your own bag because the mule cannot carry anymore. And as they were walking, they saw a 80-year-old. I'm 85, though, so I don't call him old. So an 80-year-old was breaking the stone and making the path for those mules. And the girl asked him, how old are you? And he said, I'm 80. And then she said, Grandpa, why you have to work? He looked at her and with the interpreter said, ask her, when I'm functional, why I shouldn't work. And then suddenly he said, I'll be back here tomorrow, but I have to rush home to feed my mother. She won't eat without me. So he was 80, so mother must be in 100. And while getting up, he turned around those young people and say, as long as you're functional, keep working. Otherwise, feel like. And that's the message I give to my children. As long as I'm functional, I must keep working. And that's the plan for future. As to your question, what's my plan? I would like to keep working as long as I can do it.
And would you have a message for those listening to you today?
Enjoy the life, the day by day, and keep enjoying it, and keep enjoying the dividends that Lord gave you, which is my grandchildren. So I enjoy vacationing with children, grandchildren, and once in a while I take my sisters and nieces to the resort places also. So the message is stay healthy, keep working, and enjoy the life. And keep looking forward for a happy, healthy working life rather than retiring and brooding at home. So I hope that answers the question for future.
It does, thank you. And how does it feel to have told your story today?
I share this story with my grandchildren anyway. And I learned that bug from my mother. I would not go to bed till my mother used to read me some story. So my mother used to read a story before I could go. So I picked that one. And when my grandchildren were children also, and my grandchildren growing, when putting them to bed, I used to read some story to them, and I still do it. And I enjoy doing those stories to my children.
So when people look at your archive from the 1947 partition archive decades from now, what do you hope they will take away from your life story?
Keep struggling, Don't bother with the hardship that comes in life anyway, off and on. There are so many ups and downs in the life, physically, financially, and all over. And put up with that one. Just I said about 14 years back, I had a mini heart attack and I ended with the open heart surgery. I was in the hospital, and my friend is still amazed. On the fourth day of open heart surgery, I was back to the clinic. And they say take a rest about a week after the heart surgery. Third day, my wife took me in the car, took the clinic, and then I started going with my wife driving because of the split heart. I was not allowed to drive for 2 weeks, but my wife was driving me. So the message was, as long as you're functional, keep functioning and don't get carried away by the hardship of health or financial problems, which I went through both financial problems and health problems in my lifetime. So just don't get affected by that one. Just put up with that one, keep working, and look for a better tomorrow. And my wife used to say once in a while, when we were in hardship, that there's always a better tomorrow. And I believe in that one. There's always a better tomorrow. So keep hoping and keep doing it. That's the message for younger people like you.
Well, Dr. Hameed Khan, on behalf of the 1947 Partition Archive, I would just like to thank you for allowing us to document your life story. It's been an absolute privilege to be here today and ask you these questions. So thank you truly so much for everything. And I extend my gratitude to your son as well, Dr. Junaid Khan, for being a secondary camera person as well. So thank you so much. But before we conclude, do you have any final words?
Thank you for inviting me, and I really enjoyed talking with you and doing that interview. With talking with you, even though it was arranged by Junaid, I really loved and enjoyed talking with you. And I hope I was able to answer much of the questions.
The privilege has been all mine. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My privilege.
Dr. Hameed Khan, today is Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. I have in front of me your release forms for the 1947 Partition Archive. With this, I just wanted to go over some of the information today to confirm your release form confirmations.
That's all.
Okay. So it doesn't appear that you have any restrictions. So for the project website, you have agreed for video and transcript and transcription and summary as well. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. For YouTube, Vimeo, and other video channels, you have no restrictions either, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And for Facebook, Twitter, and other social media, there are no restrictions.
That should be okay.
Okay. And for radio broadcast, that is okay and accepted as well.
I agree.
Okay. For television broadcast, that's been accepted. For television, for that potential for television broadcast, that's been accepted in the release form. Is that correct?
I'm aware of that.
Okay, perfect. For print as well, that's been accepted. And then there's no delays placed on the interview. Is this correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that we have everything documented correctly for your release form before we start the interview. So thank you very much for your confirmation.
Welcome.
Why did you decide to become a doctor?
As when I was in the junior high school, my mother used to get sick and my father used to call her private gynecologist to the house, and she used to check her, and I used to be with her all the time. And my father said, "Why are you hanging around her?" He said, "Because I want to know if she's not here, how can I help my mother?" And my mother said, "What you want to be in future?" I said, "Mother, I will be a doctor so I can better take care of you myself." And that was in junior high school, and I decided to be a doctor at that time, and I kept my promise to my mother.
When did you start South Torrance Medical Group?
I moved from Pakistan to Chicago to work in the emergency room and residencies in 1973. From there, I moved to Los Angeles in 1977, started working in the emergency room. And next to the emergency room, there was a clinic with a sign for sale by Dr. Gary Geisted. I negotiated with him and I purchased his practice. It was 1980. And then I worked half the time in the emergency room and half the time my own practice. In 81, it was too much running the two places, so I did not work for the emergency room and I started practicing full time.
How many people work in the office?
I am the only doctor, but since I was busy in the practice by 1981, I decided to hire a physician's assistant, and that time there was another practice by the name South Torrance Medical Group. I purchased that also, and then I started working both the offices. When I was in the Harbor City office, the medical assistant was working in the South Torrance Medical Group, and we flip-flop. 83, I decided to combine everything into the one office, which is the South Torrance Medical Group, and I'm still working there. I'm the only doctor there. I had a physical therapy consultant helping me, in addition to a physician assistant, and fluctuating between 6 to 8 girls had been working for me since then.
How many patients do you see in a day?
On an average, depends of course, between 20 to 30 patients a day. In busy rush time, I have seen plus 60 patients in one day when my physician assistant was there, but average comes to be 30 patients a day. मेरा गीत अमर कर दो, ना उम्र की सीमा हो, ना जन्म का हो बंधन. Yeah, this is my wife's favorite song, होंठों से छू लो तुम, मेरा गीत अमर कर दो, which basically means put on your lips my song to make them immortal. And that's a nice, good song with a good rhythm. So I'll start it right now. It's one of my wife's favorite songs. होंठों से छू लो तुम, मेरा गीत अमर कर दो. होंठों से छू लो तुम, मेरा गीत अमर कर दो. बन जाओ नीत मेरे, मेरी प्रीत अमर कर दो. होंठों से छू लो तुम, ना उम्र की सीमा हो, ना जन्म का हो बंधन. जब प्यार करे कोई तो देखे केवल मन, नई रीत गीत चला कर तुम, ये रीत अमर कर दो, होठों से छू लो तुम। जग ने छीना मुझसे मुझे जो भी लगा प्यारा, सब जीता किए मुझसे, मैं हर दम ही हारा। तुम हार के दिल अपना मेरी जीत अमर कर दो, होठों से छू लो तुम, मेरा गीत अमर कर दो। आकाश का सूनापन मेरे तन्हा मन में, आकाश का सूनापन मेरे तन्हा मन में, पायल छनकाती तुम आ जाओ जीवन में, सांसें देकर अपनी संगीत अमर कर दो, बन जाओ मीत मेरे, मेरी प्रीत अमर कर दो, होठों से छू लो तुम। जग ने छीना मुझसे मुझे जो भी लगा प्यारा, सब जीता किए मुझसे, मैं हर दम ही हारा। तुम हार के दिल अपना मेरी जीत अमर कर दो, बन जाओ मीत मेरे, मेरी प्रीत अमर कर दो, होठों से छू लो तुम, मेरा गीत अमर कर दो। आकाश का सूनापन मेरे तन्हा मन में, पायल छनकाती तुम आ जाओ जीवन में, सांसें देकर अपनी संगीत अमर कर दो, बन जाओ मीत मेरे, मेरी प्रीत अमर कर दो, होठों से छू लो तुम।
How long have you been playing the harmonium?
My father was more interested in classical music, and I was Amir's age at that time, maybe much younger, like 9-10 year old. So when the teacher used to come to teach my father, I used to sit with him and practice. But I was scared of my father. He was perfectionist. So if I tell him I want to, and if I didn't perform, it will make him unhappy. So I quit at that time. Once I was into the medical school, there is a neighboring person who was an engineer by profession, used to play. So I said, could you teach me? So I took some lessons with him. One of my patients was one of the most famous Indian scholar, and he was my patient. And one day I told, could you help my wife and start coming? It was Umrao Bundu Khan, a very popular legendary name in India, and he started coming to teach my wife. And then suddenly one day he said, why don't you learn? And I said, I don't have the voice of my voice. He said, try it. And then he started teaching me. And with my wife, of course, she was an excellent singer. She has the natural voice for singing, but I struggled it. And then I took the lesson from Ustad Umrao Bundu Khan at that time. And then since then I had been practicing myself off and on. About 20 years back, when I lost my wife, that's the time I lost my voice and desired to sing, and I quit it. But just recently, children's demand, last couple of weeks, I started doing it again after 20 years. So I think I'm still doing kind of reasonably okay.
You used to host parties at your house for music.
Umrao Bundu Khan, my popular teacher, he had lot of students, and then one day he asked, can we get all the students in your house and they can practice it? And my wife volunteered and make some snacks and everything, and Umrao Bundu Khan brought his about 6-7 students, and me, Ammi, and all those perform in my house. And once we moved to Palace Verdes without the Ustad, of course, then my wife decided to have a family get together, and 3 of my sister out of the 6 were good singers. So my wife used to have a home party, and we all used to sing for each other. No one to criticize or make fun of us, but we did a good job at home.
What are you making?
I'm making nihari today because my children love my nihari. It's not as good as their ammi used to make it, but I follow her recipe and I do reasonably good. It's called nihari because nihari means in Urdu, nihar means morning, mu is mouth. Nihar mu means first thing in the morning. Because conventionally nihari is eaten as the first thing in the morning because they used to put the meat on the oven late in the night to cook for 8 hours, and early in the morning without eating anything else, that was the first thing people used to eat it. That's why it's called niharmu, and that's why it is called nihari. And I already turned the flame on. Flame is on, and I put about 4 ounces of oil there. I already put the meat down there, and the meat is semi-cooked. Once the meat is cooked about 5-6 minutes, which I already started cooking earlier, I put ginger and garlic paste. And with the ginger and garlic paste, it is right now cooking, and I have to keep cooking for about half an hour, and then I will be adding the water. So I'll go off the camera now. Half an hour when meat is half done, Then I add all the other spices into that one. There are a lot of spices to be put, like chili powder and masala and other about 30-40 different ingredients, and cook it for another half an hour. And after half an hour, when the meat is about half done, I add lot of water in that one. Roughly for 5 pounds of beef, we add 10 cup of water and bring it to boil. Once it has come to the boil, then we take about 4-5 tablespoons of the flour, lightly roasted, dissolve in the water and add into that one, stirring not to get it clumping. And once we add all the spices down there, meat is still cooking there, then after it has come to the boil, and then I turn the flame to a very low, and we leave it on the low flame for about 8 hours till it is done.
How many trees do you have?
I have around plus 20 trees of different type. And just to let you know, the first tree which does not have any fruit right now is the red apple. And then the one which a lot of these apples coming already is the green apple. And this gives me every year like 40-50 apples. And then I have that beautiful flower called hibiscus. And the reason I like it, I call it my mother's fruit, because my mother used to grow it, and whenever my father was under stress, she used to take 4 or 5 of these hibiscus flower, squeeze the lemon juice, bring to boil, put some sugar, put on the ice crystal, and it was a delicious drink, and it was very relaxing for my father. And after that, there is one thing that I like very much. It is camcot. And there are a lot of camcot comes here. They are very, very sour fruit, but delicious, and I make jam from that one. Next I have is a tree which is called anjeer, a fig tree. the ball for me. Bring it back to me. Jackie, bring it back. Jackie, leave it to me. Jackie, bring it back. Drop. Okay, Jackie. Jackie, drop it. Let's go inside it. Let's come on in. Here.
Okay, go ahead.
Jackie, have it. One more. You want one more? One more. Good girl. I will be back here, but I have to empty her bed from the toys. Then I'll give it to her. She needs that.
You
bed
can
to
just
be
do
free.
just do whatever you're doing work-wise. I'll just watch it. We're okay.
So I'll give it there, and you can follow her from there.
Just give it right here, Abu.
Okay, Jackie. Ready? Shall I? Good girl. Jackie, eat it here. She always eats in the bed.
How long have you had Jackie?
About 11 years. Because Junaid tricked me that I should have a dog, so she keeps me walking, and then I have to keep walking with her every day about 2-3 miles. When I got it from the breeders, she was only about 6-7 months old puppy. So she has been with me for 11 years, and she's very well trained. The one good thing I did was I trained her not to go potty on the walk. She goes in the backyard at a place only, under the big eucalyptus tree. So on the walk we don't carry the potty bag. And she has been good, and she goes with me about 2 to 3 miles every evening.
She wants you to tell her about your sisters. Go down from the oldest sister to the youngest, one at a time, and tell her about your sisters.
Okay, go ahead.
Just tell her about your sister.
Yes, if you can tell me about your sisters, please.
My oldest was a brother, Abdul Tawab Khan, and then were all the girls. The oldest girl name was Tahira, Tahira. Tahira. And we used to call a nickname Baji. So full name was Tahira Baji. She's deceased now. Next sister was Qudsiya, Qudsia. Qudsiya. And because she was the younger of the two, we call her Choti Appa, means younger sister. Qudsiya Choti Appa. Third sister was Razia, Razia. And she also passed out as a young girl. After Razia was me, and after me was all sisters. First one was Zakia, Zakia. Next was Nafisa, Nafisa. Next to that was Wasima, Wasima. Next to that one was Anisa, Anisa, Anisa. Next to that, the youngest was Amina, Amina, Amina. The last name is Samina, which is kind of confidential. She was not the real sister. She was daughter of my oldest sister, but died it, but she was raised with other sister. She was about the same age as Amina, but her name was Samina.
Can you tell her some story about each sister? Tell her about each sister a little bit that's alive today.
Some stories about the sisters.
Yes, please.
Not much to do. The eldest, Tahira, which was a Baji, was older. I used to bug her very much. And one day we were fighting, and suddenly she said, "My big brother, would you shut up now?" I was the younger one. What she implied was I always act like her big brother. I was 10 years younger. And once she got married, she went to another estate called Sikar, Sikar, Sikar. I used to often go and visit her at that place. Qudsiya was the next one. She was the oldest one after my mother. And when my mother was getting pretty old, Qudsiya, we call Choti Appa, younger sister, was always like a mother for all the younger children. And she controlled all of us. Razia was after her. I don't have much of the memory for her because I believe, only 5-6 years old when we lost her. But she used to do the prayer with my grandfather. And one day my grandfather was doing the prayer and she had the hands before her hand and doing a long, long prayer. And my grandfather asked, "Sweetheart, what were you practicing? What were you praying?" I was practicing, I should have a baby brother. And soon after that, I was conceived and and my grandfather always said, "You came as a blessing from Razia." She was a darling sister. Then, of course, I was born, and all these other sisters were raised as my younger sister. I raised them as my daughters. Anyway, not much of the story with them, but I raised them and I'm happy, I flourish. No special story, but all were married, moved out, and I was able to support them till they got married.
So you mentioned that Qudsiya and Razia passed away. When did they die? What ages and what did they die from?
My oldest sister's name was Tahira. She had some complication of the delivery and multiple other complications. I don't know the detail, but she died before Samina was even a year old. And soon after Samina was my baby sister, Amina was born. So she was neck to neck with Amina. So my mother raised both of them like twin girls, Amina and Samina. But my oldest sister, Samina's mother, Tahira, died of some childhood complications. But her father lived to be a long time. He was a veterinarian. And he was at his veterinarian camp one time sitting on his desk. And there was a table fan. It was a hot area, table fan on the table. It is believed he was trying to adjust the angle of the table fan. And the table fan has electric short circuits. So the moment he put his hand on the table fan frame to turn, his hand was caught. He got electrocuted, died on the table. When his assistant came running, he found that his hand was caught into the fan and fan was electrified. He was smart to turn the plug off, moved it, but he had already passed away. And that time Samina was only under 2 years old. So actually Samina at the young age has lost both the parents. That's how my mother raised her with Amina as her children. So that was the story of Samina's parents.
And can you tell me about your sister Zakia?
Zakia was younger to me, and she graduated into a bachelorate in home economics. And then she started running in Karachi, Pakistan, a school for young children but mainly concentrating on home economics. And then she continued, and then she did her master's in languages, and then she became accepted as an assistant professor. She was working on her thesis, so she never became a doctorate. She was never designated as a full professor. She all her life remained as an assistant professor of literature. And she continued to practice in Karachi University as a teacher in a school till she moved here. She was married to a businessman there, and with that businessman, they moved to a city known as Dubai now. And while they were in Dubai, Zakia was not practicing anymore, and she was staying with her husband. She never had the children. And after finishing the assignment in Dubai, her husband moved back to Karachi again. And there he died of some natural conditions. It was supposed to be a heart attack. And Zakia became a widowed. She moved back to me after being widowed, and finally I brought back over here. And once coming here, she started working as a school teacher anyway for a short time. But she's retired fully now.
And Nafisa?
Nafisa is my youngest sister. She was my wife's class fellow in the university. She graduated as a master's in literature. And then as a hobby, she took special courses in hypnotherapy, and she became a hypnotherapist. She even now practices as a part-time hypnotherapist, mainly concentrating on quit smoking. And as I recall now, even I referred multiple of my patients who were addicted to smoking to her for hypnotherapy. And I recall in double-digit numbers, all of them were fully successful to quit smoking. She was married to a realtor who was working as a realtor, but then Nafisa decided to run a child care center. And she was running with the help of her husband that child care center also, along with being a hypnotherapist. And she was director of that child care center till her husband passed away. And after that, she decided not to do anything. She sold the school to somebody with the condition that she will continue to provide supervisory services for that school to the new owner. She still does it.
And can you tell me about Wasima, please?
Wasima also graduated as a master's. She started teaching in Karachi, Pakistan as a college teacher. And then she got married to an immigrant originally from Pakistan, but who had gone to Germany and who was working as a chemical engineer in Germany. Once we got her married, that gentleman came to United States, and he worked for a company as a chemical engineer for some time. He's retired now. And Wasima, I offered her a job as office manager for my clinic, which my wife was running, and she needed some help. So she hired Wasima as office manager, and she worked as an office manager for my clinic for about 12 years. And then finally she felt she was getting old and retired. And now she is leading a retired life with her husband. And her husband is Ali Khan, Shahid Ali Khan.
And Amina?
And then comes Anisa.
Oh, Anisa.
Anisa graduated from the same medical school as I did it. And finally, she was hired in the hospital that I started. I told earlier, Abbasi Shahid has become a emergency room physician for that hospital, and she continued to work as a physician in Pakistan as Dr. Anisa. She got married to Ilyas Haider, who does computer business. With him, she moved to United States. Now they are settled in Houston in Texas. She did a reciprocity examination of the medical doctor here, but never got licensed in the United States. So she's legally not practicing as a physician in the United States, But then she, with the help of her husband, started a hyperbaric oxygen chamber therapy center and an MRI center. She being the owner, but she had this staff. She still run that MRI center and hyperbaric oxygen chamber therapy center in Houston, Texas. But she's kind of a retired, living with her husband, who is still into computer business. That is Dr. Anisa.
And then Amina?
And Amina is the youngest. Even though she did her master's in languages, she was teaching in Karachi, Pakistan, into a neighboring school as a teacher for the languages. And then she was married for an engineer who worked for about 40 years for Hewlett Packard Company as a computer engineer. He just last year retired from Hewlett Packard Computer as a consultant engineer after 40 years. And she had been living, and since husband was very well off, Amina decided, raising her 3 children, not to work anymore. So she is working as a retired. Now all 3 children are married and moved out. So she and her husband are living as a retired, happy life now.
And if you can tell me, you've already told me about Samina, who is the daughter of Tahira Baji, and she was raised as sisters with you. But if you can also tell me about your brothers, Abdul Latif, who passed away as an infant, and then your brother Tawab Khan, please.
My brother Abdul Tawab Khan, Tawwab, Abdul Tawab Khan, she migrated from India during the 47 partition, office transferred to Los Angeles to become an engineer there. There he started working as a lecturer for NED Engineering College. That college then later on became the university called NED Engineering University, one of the prestigious engineer university in Karachi, Pakistan. And then he became the vice chancellor of that engineer university. Traditionally in Pakistan, all the chancellors of the university are the head of the state or the country. So they always don't have any official chancellor. They're only the head of the state. So vice chancellor is really as the acting chancellor. So he was appointed as a vice chancellor of the engineering university. And then after working as a vice chancellor of the engineering university, NED Engineering University, he retired after many, many years, and he became as what is called emeritus professor of the university. After getting retired, he was getting bored, so a new university was made in Karachi, Pakistan, called Sir Syed Engineering University. And he, being a senior vice chancellor of the other university, he was elected to become a vice chancellor of Sir Syed Engineering University. And he worked at that university till the day he died. Historically, he used to work at the university as a vice chancellor up to 2 in the afternoon. But one day at around 1 o'clock, he asked the secretary, anything remaining on my desk to work? And he said, sir, no. Then he said, call the driver. He didn't drive her, he used only the chauffeur-driven car. So they called the driver at 1 o'clock. He went downstairs to get in the car. And when he was on the way to the home, on the way, he suddenly had chest pain. So he told the driver, I'm having a bad chest pain, don't go home, take me to the nearest hospital. They went to the nearest hospital in Naziabad, where he reached around 2 o'clock. He was rushed to the emergency room, and soon the ER doctor came out to tell my sister-in-law rushed to that place because driver told him he's at the hospital. He pronounced he died of the heart attack. So he continued to work till 2 hours before he passed away. And he died as a vice chancellor of Sir Syed Engineering University. He was 10 years younger to me. And he worked to the end. That was my oldest brother. To retreat back, he was not the oldest brother. I had one eldest brother who died as infancy in other age. So we call this chancellor as the eldest brother, but actually he has a one younger brother, Abdul Latif, who died in infancy. So that was the oldest.
Was there a particular cause of his death that was identified for Abdul Latif in his infancy?
No, because he being a vice chancellor, he was going for his annual physicals. And the last physical he had done, which was only less than 6 months before that, he was certified to be in good health. He had no other health conditions. Looks like apparently, unknowingly, he had a cholesterol problem or something which clogged the artery, and it caused a sudden heart attack to him. And he died of that reported heart attack. But there was no other known conditions. Otherwise, he was a healthy person.
And for a point of clarification, so your parents then had 11 biological children, is that correct?
That is correct. And even though he was the chancellor of the university and a senior engineer, there was a big difference, actually litigation between Pakistan and Holland on a wall which was made on the ocean along the beach on Karachi harbor. Then wall broke, and Pakistan claimed it was a defective wall that caused the break, and they sued Holland for the damages. And Pakistan government made him arbitrator, and he went to hold the case in the world court against between Pakistan and Holland about the damages of that Pakistani ocean wall they broke. He was the chief consultant for that one. She won the case, and then Pakistan was compensated for that. So that was one thing he did as a chief consultant for litigation in the world court as an engineer. But all his life he was a teacher, lecturer, and finally the vice chancellor as he died.
And for your parents, how many children did they have altogether?
The 11 that I mentioned were all the children my parents were held. And as I mentioned earlier, he married that 17-year-old girl from Amer State when he was 24. And after getting married, he had all these children, starting with Abdul Tawab, the first one, to the youngest Amina. Those were the 11 children. He had it and raised it.
Okay. And where are you in that line? So you had how many sisters above you? So you had your two brothers, the one who passed away, and then which sisters were born before you?
Yeah, I had 3 elder sisters and 4 younger sisters.
Okay, so 4 younger then. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your sisters, brothers, or your family?
No, that's all I know, and these are the pleasant memories of I have my brother and everyone.
Abu Samina.
And Samina is considered to be the youngest sister raised with Amina. She did her BS in languages. She was preparing for her master's when she moved to America along with all the other sisters. When she came to America, she started working as a high school teacher. She worked for a couple of years, but didn't do much. And now she worked as a medical assistant for my clinic, because that time my wife had to let go one of the medical assistant who was not doing work. She was looking for some help for the clinic. She offered Samina that rather than working as a school teacher, why don't you take a mini course as a medical assistant and come and help your brother? She did it, and she became a medical assistant, and she worked in that capacity at my clinic for, as I recall, about 17 years as a medical assistant, and all my patients loved her because she had a wonderful memory. And whenever my patients came, she immediately knew what was the name of their children or grandchildren, and she asked them by name, how's that, and that was doing it. So she loved Samina as a medical assistant. Once she turned 65, she felt that it was getting too hard running the practice for that hour. At age 65, she retired from the clinic. She's retired now and enjoying the retired life. But she retired as a medical assistant rather than a school teacher. That is Samina.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to add about your family before we conclude this?
No, that's about them. I still recall my grandfather because I was 3 years old, so I still have the memory. And he had arthritis, so he was using the walking cane. So I used to, even though he passed away, I used to take his cane and move around telling everybody, I'm the grandpa. And I love that one. So, and he cared for me very much. I have memory of him taking me on the horseback and taking me to his garden on the horseback. And that's the horse I inherited from him. That's the horse, once I fell from him, gave me that big scar. Because I was 3 years old riding the horse, and horse hit a shade to cut it from here, and I raised it here. And then my father used that horse for a long time. It was
Thank you.
a full Arabian horse. So that's the memory I had for my grandpa.
Thank you so much for sharing these memories. I truly appreciate it.